Hello, friends. Welcome to another BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations number 19. 19, man. Feels like I just started doing this crazy thing yesterday, and we're already up to 19. I think I mentioned this in the last episode, but I wrote many of these posts a long time ago, and more often than not, when I'm reading them to you, I'm revisiting them for the first time since I've written them. There's a little bit of cleanup involved, a little bit of editing before I post them on Mirror, but for the most part, it's quick read and then away we go. We press record. I think that immediacy is important. I think it's important for me as I'm reading these things and giving commentary to sort of be on the leading edge of my thought. The last thing I want to do is be professorial or boring. I'm really trying to mimic the dynamism of Jiu Jitsu in how I'm presenting these things. Like, for example, you wouldn't script a roll, or I suppose you could try, but it might not work out. So I can't really script this stuff beyond writing these little micro essays, reading them, and reacting. So trying to give you an authentic feel there. Anyway, it's been an interesting week on the mats in my training life. We have a bunch of people in our gym who are getting ready for PANS. One of them is Emily Kwok, my instructor, also my partner in business. We both do some consulting work together. And man, I was rolling with her on Tuesday night, and she caught me in a toe hold, and I tapped as fast as I could, but man, that sucker was tight, so I've been limping a little bit on the left foot. Just got over an ankle sprain on the right foot, but I'll say this, I came away from my training session with Emily that night, and I thought to myself in some spicier terms, man, she is just going to run through anyone she comes up against. Coming off her last win in Euros, and she had another major victory before that, she just seems like she was shot out of a cannon on Tuesday night, and feel bad for whoever is on the receiving end of all that momentum. So good luck to Emily. Good luck to everybody else in my school who's competing at PANS coming up. And my screen just went dark, and it's back. Great. Good luck to everybody competing at PANS. Really looking forward to hearing about your experiences on the mats, and really looking forward to learning from what you learn. To that end, this post is about teaching and about learning, and it's something that I think transcends what we do in jiu-jitsu on the mats and applies more globally to life. And really that's what I'm trying to do when I present these meditations, is to take these ideas or these themes or principles that we practice on the mat and get us all thinking about, well, how might that apply globally to what I'm doing as a partner, as a husband, as a wife, as a father, as a mother, etc. Jiu-jitsu is a beautiful martial art in its own right, and you could certainly train it as just a martial art, but I think it has the potential to train much, much more, and that's kind of what I'm getting at with this week's meditation, which is called Planting Jiu-Jitsu Seeds. Students come wanting answers, a lesson. I am not possessive of these lessons or these answers. I will share them gladly. But the students must remember that any similarities between their answers and mine are coincidental. I hand them a few seeds here and there, just as I have been handed a few seeds here and there. Will they even germinate? The students decide what to plant, what to water, and what to harvest. It's perpetual. We make choices and we reap whatever the ground or our effort and fortune yield. We make better choices next spring. It's a lot of work. No one tells you that at the trial class. We look to the writer and we see only the finished work, not the countless revisions. We look to the fighter and we see only the glory or the agony. We do not see the training. We look to the farmer and we see the food, not the dirt etched into her fingernails. The students want to know how it's done, but there are no checklists to follow. It's too complex. There are no shortcuts or hacks either. So the students ask for lessons. Instead, they get a few myths and a few seeds. It's always sowing season. Yeah, so that last line, it's always sowing season, reminds me very much of one of my favorite brand new songs called Sowing Season, parentheses, yeah. That record in particular was important. It came to me at kind of like an important period in my life, a transitional period in my life, and I kind of tend to revisit it when I'm going through big thematic transitions. Like I was listening to it a lot before Cormac was born. I was listening to it a lot during the pandemic when we were sort of transitioning through this pre-pandemic world into a post-pandemic world. And I think that jujitsu as an art, more so than any other art form that I've ever been involved with, is fantastic at training jujitsu, transitions. I often say to students that the jujitsu is not the position, the submission. It's everything that happens in between them. It's all the unscripted stuff. It's the extemporaneous things that happen at the spur of the moment, just like the extemporaneous things that are coming out of my mouth and out of my head right now. This is the verbal jujitsu. And I think this thematic training that I'm discussing right now, this transitional training, it's not something that you can follow, right? It's not something you can learn by rote. For example, I might be able to write down a list of steps for you to execute a triangle, but ultimately those steps are going to be a low resolution version of a triangle. Even if I gave you the most detailed script of how to execute a triangle that I could possibly come up with, it's still only going to be a copy of a copy of a copy. It's not going to be the real thing. You're going to lose resolution in the description. And I think that jujitsu helps us realize that in a very profound way. And I mean, realize in the literal sense of the word. Like, we have to make this principle real. And we do it with this art of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And, we repeat that over and over and over again. Whether we're learning the triangle, whether we're learning how to pass guard, whether we're learning how to, whatever principle you want it to use, how to play guard, how to transition between guards. We're finding our own way constantly. And the best thing that our teachers can do for us is to plant these little seeds here and there. They're like polite suggestions that we can either take or leave, but the taking and the cultivation and the growing, all of that messy work that happens, that falls to the student. That's not something that the teacher can do for you. We're ultimately finding our own way through this art. And we're ultimately finding our own way through life too, right? I mean, there's no manual for life. I suppose you could turn to certain religious books for guidance or certain philosophers, but all of these things are theoretical. There's no operating manual for life. There's nothing that's going to tell you how to do a cold boot on being a parent, or there's nothing that's going to tell you what to do if your marriage fails. These are messy things that we kind of need to feel our way through. We have to embrace the transitional nature of these things. It's not something we can just do by rote. And, I think that the beauty of jiu-jitsu is yes, it's a martial art. It's an amazingly capable martial art. There's no denying that. But this transitional training that I'm talking about, it needs to be realized. It's not something that you can just train in the abstract. We can't just think about these things. We actually need a practice in order to integrate these principles into our life. And jiu-jitsu is a phenomenal practice for integrating these principles. You embody them, you put them into play on the mat, and then all of a sudden, maybe you don't realize it, maybe you do, you're navigating transition better in your personal life. And I think that if we can bring a little bit more mindfulness to that thematic training, it's going to make the impact of those lessons even stronger. And I think that this ties into what the adult developmental psychologist Robert Keegan is talking about when he talks about how adults mature and develop. He has this theory that adults progress through this hierarchy of development. I'll skip the lower rungs of the hierarchy. Most people are in what he would call a socialized frame of mind, meaning we are very responsive to social pressures. You can see this all the time in jiu-jitsu schools. Some academies are very strict about what is and what is not acceptable. It could be things as simple as we only wear this color gi, or, we must bow when we walk onto the mat. Or it can be something as complex or unsavory as the culture that's coming down from the leadership. Sometimes it can be a predatory culture. And these things are just accepted at face value because there's this socialized pressure to conform. If you deviate from the herd, you might get eaten by the lions, that sort of thing. And that, to be fair, I don't know if Keegan has said this in so many words, but being socialized serves us well. Otherwise, we're all just feral animals or sociopaths or serial killers. There is some merit to being a bit more conformist, because then people want to play with you. And in order to succeed in the metagame of life, you need people to be able to play with you. You can't really do it by yourself. So there is some merit to being socialized. But if you stay, I think Keegan would say, if you stay in that socialized frame of development, you're missing out. And the next stage of development that comes after that is this self-authoring mindset, where you can look at everything you've learned from being a socialized human being, and you can decide to go your own way. You can make an informed decision. You know who you are. You can root strongly into that sensation, and you proceed based on your own volition. And that's a major step forward. That's what I think, love him or hate him, I think that's what Jordan Peterson, for example, is trying to get a lot of people to do, is to take that jump into that self-authoring mindset. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I think Keegan would say that most people tend to be in that socialized mindset, most adults rather, and fewer people make that transition into the self-authoring mindset. And there's another stage of adult development that comes after that, which is self-transforming. And the self-transforming mind, I think the best way I can summarize it is that the self-transforming mind can sit with paradox. It can accept that two seemingly contradictory things can be true, and they can synthesize those two truths into something that's even greater. You see this all the time in Jiu Jitsu. There's dogma around you should or you shouldn't do this, but then somebody takes that dogma, breaks it down, and finds an exception to the rule, and that exception is so strong that the rest of the game needs to catch up to it, right? I think that's a lot of what like Mike Musumeci has done with his guard game and with his leg lock game, for example. These people, they've so embraced the transitional nature of jiu-jitsu, that area, that magical area that exists between the positions and between the fixed and static theorems, that they're just making these things. It's almost as if they're pulling them out of thin air. I think that's a product of the self-transforming mind. So where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is that I think that, and again, if you were to, I would love to talk to Bob Keegan about this, but I think Keegan would say that most adults are moving up that hierarchy, right? People aren't just sitting there. People tend to incline themselves toward becoming more or becoming better. I think that even someone who's quote unquote lazy or unmotivated, if you look at their life over like a timeline structure, you're going to see a clear progress that's happening there. So what I think is that if we apply ourselves to something specific, like jiu-jitsu, for example, and we do it in a mindful and conscious way, I think that we can accelerate this developmental growth. I think that we can get to the transforming mind faster than if we're just kind of going about things haphazardly. And jiu-jitsu, as far as all the things that I've done in terms of athletic pursuits, intellectual pursuits, spiritual pursuits, jiu-jitsu kind of has a foot in those three realms, and it's really helped me to be able to even sit here and have this conversation with you right now. If I didn't do jiu-jitsu, for example, I don't think I would be capable of engaging in this sort of way. It's really opened me up. It's really made me embrace the nature of possibility, to seek exposure. Like this podcast, there's nobody here. It's just me talking out of my ass. You could be rolling your eyes and laughing your ass off right now at me. I really don't know. But I think that there's something to these experiences, and I think that there's something to the fact that they can all pull us up. And I think there's something to the fact that this elevation can happen in this martial art in a really profound and powerful way. We can certainly train it as a martial art in isolation, as combatives, as self-defense, as a sport. Great, beautiful. I think that the sport in of itself continues to evolve in that capacity. But I'm 36 years old. I'm a dad. I'm a husband. My body doesn't work as well as it used to. I still love this game, and I still want to grow in this game. And I want to grow as a human as well. And man, this game is just the perfect terrain to work on that growth. And I'm just so delighted to be here at this time in the sport as it's reaching this level of maturity. And I'm so delighted to be here with people who feel the same way. Maybe they haven't articulated it, but there's a reason why people are listening to this podcast. There's a reason why people are watching. And I think that maybe you all have felt these things too. And I'm just excited to have that community where we can all experience this growth together. I think that about wraps it up. That's all I've got for you this week on BJJ Meditations. I got a little list here of things I'm supposed to say. First and foremost is, if you are stumbling upon this podcast and you're enjoying it, please subscribe. If you are a longtime listener, I would love it if you could leave me a review. An honest review is greatly appreciated. And if you're really getting a lot of benefit out of this, please feel free to share it with a fellow grappler, or maybe somebody who isn't even a grappler. Like, I should tell a little story here about how I got into this briefly. I worked with this guy named Joe, and Joe was I could tell right away that Joe was a very soulful guy. He had a photo of Amiri Baraka on his desk that I think he took. And he had cauliflower ears, and I love that juxtaposition, this warrior poet thing he had going on. And he asked me out of the blue, because he knew I enjoyed working out with kettlebells. He asked me out of the blue if I'd ever done jiu-jitsu. And I said no, but I'd love to try it. And Joe brought me to my first class, and I tried it out, and it changed my life. And it continues to change my life every single day. And every time I see Joe pop up in my social media feed, I just put a little gratitude out into the universe for what he did. So maybe you know somebody who's struggling. Maybe you know somebody who is looking for some kind of transformation in their life, some kind of meaningful activity. Maybe you can share this with them as a way of getting them into the sport. So I was going to say share it with a fellow grappler, but share it with a beautiful soul like Joe, I would say. If you want to support BJJ Meditations, A, totally optional. This will always be free. And B, if you feel so moved and you want to support, I suggest that you go over to Mirror. The link is in the show notes. Mirror is a blogging platform that's hosted on the Ethereum blockchain. Each of these essays is available as an NFT, depending on what Ethereum is trading at on a given day. Lately, single NFT, I think, runs about $15. So fantastic way for you to support the podcast. Also a fantastic way for you to get your feet wet in cryptocurrency if that's something you're interested in. And also check out my Substack, joehannon.com. Substack.com/joehannon is the correct URL. That will also be in the show notes. I write more about my consulting work with Emily there, themes that I'm interested in, and less about jiu-jitsu. But if you're interested in sort of these global thematic things that I'm talking about here, that's where you'll find some more content on that. And finally, if you want to stay up to date on all things BJJ Meditations, strongly suggest you follow us on Instagram. It's BJJ_meditations on Instagram. That's it. Had a really awesome time talking to you guys, kind of a one-sided conversation, but I really do look forward to filming these episodes, and I really look forward to hopefully connecting with more of you in person or on the internet. Please feel free to DM the BJJ Meditations Instagram account if you have any questions, comments. Just would love to hear more from you. You certainly hear a lot from me. But thanks everybody, and we'll talk next week.